Hello everyone, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everybody for the feedback that you guys gave me for the macro advocacy presentation. There was a lot of good feedback, a lot that I would definitely take into consideration if I do go with the palliative care field. So again, I'd like to thank you all. On to the questions. So, Tom has two questions. The first question is, what sort of screening process would you suggest for determining volunteers to help at these homes? How do you plan on assessing the quality of the people who volunteer to help you at the house? Well, Tom, volunteering at this house would require criminal background checks and fingerprinting to ensure as much as possible the patient's safety. We would also have a rigorous interview process that would entail information about previous work experience within the healthcare or human services field, working with clients in a home environment, etc. As for the students, they would have to go through the same checks. However, since they'll be supervised by the social worker initially all the time, then more sporadically as the semester rolls on, the student also has to have daily sit-downs with the social worker to discuss what happened during the day. The social worker would also talk with the client to have a types of checks and balances system to see if their needs were being met by the student. So there would be an extensive screening process to make sure that the safety and the comfort of the client is number one. Second question, what will need to be done for coverage of the house when students from the UB School of Social Work are on break? So when the students are on break or are not in field at all, volunteers and extra hospital and personnel staff from ECMC would take over. Again, the goal for this collaboration is to get the students the experience to work with these patients during their end-of-life process. So the student would work with patients that are provided care within the time period of the field education internship. The rest of the time, ECMC would use community volunteers to assist in the home, and when those volunteers are unavailable, staff from ECMC would take over. I'd like to thank you, Tom, for those two questions. They were very good. Stacy has two questions as well. So, her first question is, I believe I understand the role of social worker in terms of psychological care. However, will the social worker also provide as a case manager to the individual? That's a good question. In this case, the social worker would have co-duties with the designated nurse practitioner that would be on site to work on the patient's case management. The nurse practitioner would provide services related to the patient's medical support aspect, while the social worker would be more person-centered in care and obtain services that are outside services or agencies that would come in to help the patient during their end-of-life process. The second question, will these homes require nursing or medical staffing in addition to volunteers and social workers? Previously said with Tom, yes they will. However, the volunteers and social workers are there for emotional and social support as through the training that they would receive. The patients will still have routine medical staff to come in and check in them and to ensure their comfort, but that's more of a medical side. Volunteers and social workers are there for the trauma-informed and emotional and social side to support them. Thank you very much, Stacy, for providing your questions. Shelley has one question, and her question is, my question is, if the training is currently used for the volunteers in your area, how would the training be different for the UB students? Sorry. This program, which is a real program, is actually in its infant stages at ECMC. Unfortunately, the Mercy Doulas training is not yet acclimated to the Buffalo area. ECMC is trying to establish this training so the person in palliative care can receive the emotional and social support that they need during the end-of-life process. The training for UB students Shelley, would be the same as the volunteers that would be in this program. A person who is certified in this training would come to UB to provide the training for the students. Once this training is done, they will be allowed to go on site to work with the patients to provide emotional and social support for these patients. Once the program is set up and hopefully successful, the training could then become part of the curriculum, for example, such as a palliative care class within the UB School of Social Work program. Holly is next, and she has 2 questions. The first question is, how would patients be chosen to participate, and what requirements or guidelines would be looked at? Since the house can only carry 2 patients at a time, the kind of background check or the requirements the patient would have to have is they probably have to be diagnosed with a terminal illness that has a life expectancy of less than 6 months, although that's not set in stone. Also, the patient would have to have no outside resources that they could live with, such as family, and that could provide 24/7 care for them. Participation would be measured on a case-by-case basis, and also on the availability of beds, which are only 2. The goal for ECMC long-term would be to create more of these home settings to assist more patients with this type of care. Hopefully the program is successful enough to accomplish this in the future. Unfortunately, most people would not have the option to experience this at this time due to the limited space available, Holly. So that is unfortunate. That is a limitation that this new program would have. The second question is, to what extent will patients and their families be involved in the process? For instance, would they have a say in which professionals and volunteers they would work with? The patients and families would be as independent as possible within this home setting. We want to make it as close to a home environment as possible. They probably wouldn't have a say in who assists them due to the medical staff and the volunteers and the social workers and psychologists that would be assigned to their home setting. But they could complain if they feel that their care is not adequate. If any abuse occurs, the worker would be terminated immediately with charges possibly pending. Families would be offered to be a big part of the support process. In fact, they have the option to be the main support. We would be kind of the secondary support. The workers and volunteers are there for support in absence of family members that the patient may have. However, because the family members cannot provide 24/7 care in their homes, this is the reason that we would have the home setting, to provide that emotional and social support when the family cannot. Lindsay has 2 questions as well. What is the funding source for this project? Is it the individual's insurance or charity base? The funding source would be partially based on grants that the palliative care department had lobbied for, and partially on the patient's insurance. Of course, we all know that most insurances won't cover this innovative type of program, so ECMC would also hold fundraisers and obtain local community supports that would defray the patient's costs. Once someone enters the hospice zone, will their care be transferred to another facility? If transfer is mandated or expected, will you advocate for or against such a transfer? In short, no. Since the person option to have long-term illness and or the end of care life in a home setting, they would stay in the facility until death occurs, unless the patient requires extensive medical assistance, in which they may have to be transferred to the hospital. But since most patients are on comfort care protocol, they would stay in the home setting. Which leads to the last person, Camille. If your presentation you discussed that many individuals who have life-threatening illnesses would prefer to die at their home rather than a hospital or nursing home setting, which is understandable. How would you intend to create a feeling of home for these patients, considering they will still be out of their desired environment? The facility would be like a home to them. They would be allowed to bring their stuff into their home, except for pets, and just because of hygienic purposes. There would be no visiting hours, so family could be there 24/7 if they need to. They would have access to TV and phone. Meals that are requested could be made for them by volunteers. I'd like to thank everybody for their questions. I hope I provided some sort of added information that helped you in answering or some of these questions that you may have. I'd like to thank you for your time and have a great day.